Hey guys, welcome to Rebuilding the Beast. I'm your host, Festus Ezeli, NBA player turned podcast host. And on this show, I'm going to have a lot of my inspiring friends come on to share with you their rebuilding journeys. I hope you can take the tips from their lives and apply it to your life as well. Oh, and don't forget to hit subscribe, like, comment, share with a friend. All the things. All right, I'll see you guys soon.
What's up, Rachel? How are you doing? Welcome to the Rebuilding the Beast podcast. Where are you calling from?
Yeah, I am outside of Minneapolis in St. Paul, so in the Twin Cities area.
Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being willing to share your story. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. Friday is within sight.
We're halfway through. Let's go. Today we're going to be going through your story. We're going to be talking about a topic that far too many people experience in their families and with their loved ones, cancer. And I say it with that emphasis because I just lost somebody a couple of days ago to cancer. Unfortunately, your husband passed away from cancer as well. Can you a little bit about him?
Yeah, so I actually moved here to Minnesota. It'll be 21 years pretty soon. I moved here when I was 18. I'm 39. Not knowing one person, moved here to go to the University of Minnesota. And sophomore year, first semester, met this guy that's almost 6 years older than me and totally did not plan on it, but we just clicked. And I moved here, no family or anyone around. My parents couldn't say anything because they got married when they were 19 and 26, even though they were like, who's this older guy? But we were together for 3 years. And then when I was 22 and graduated from college, we got married. And he worked at night in a factory. So we were kind of like ships in the night, passing the whole time. And then we would be together on the weekend and, watch 24 or something like that and just look at each other and be like, oh, like just so excited to finally be together. And, it was growing pains in my 20s and stuff like that. We had what I call a space age marriage where we got along really, really well. And we would argue maybe a couple times a year, but it'd be like about stupid stuff like the dishes or, stuff like that. But when I was 28 and he was 35, he really didn't feel well one day. And he went to the doctors just for a regular checkup. And they sent him for some blood work. And then he ended up needing blood transfusions. And when we were there, they said, hang on, our doctor is looking at your blood. And then they said, you need to go down the street to the Humphrey Center. They didn't tell us it was the Humphrey Cancer Center. So he was misdiagnosed with a blood disorder, not cancer. And I remember he was 6'2". I remember, he reached his long arms in the air and he said, at least it's not the big C. And then a couple hours after we got home, he got a phone call and it was the doctor we'd met with. And she said, his name was Grayson, Grayson, sorry, but what I diagnosed you with, that's not what you have. And she said, that's good, right? And he said, actually, no. So he went in the next day, had a bone marrow biopsy on that Friday. And I knew it in my bones. I knew God was just like, okay, be at peace. Don't freak out. This is what's going on. And then on Saturday, he was diagnosed with cancer. So I was 28 and a cancer wife, and it just kind of cycled from there. It was just nuts.
So before we even started the podcast, we were saying something about God and how sometimes, we tell him our plans and he looks at them and just laughs. How did you deal with this? Like, you're 28 years old and your husband just got diagnosed. Tell me about the years that followed after this diagnosis.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what's interesting is the summer before he got sick, I had like this horrible pelvic pain and just rupture in my body. And I literally wrote out the pain, looked down and expected a baby to come out. And I was like, God, what is going on? And I went to the doctor and I had exploratory surgery and I found out I had endometriosis and I might not ever be able to have kids. So I had some depression and things like that going on. I was 28, he was 35. You'd think that, this point we'd been together since I was 19, he was 26. We had the dog, the house, the dog, all these things. So you think you're going to do the normal type stuff, right? So it was the end of 2010 and thinking, okay, life is going to be this was really hard, but it's got to be better. And he gets a fortune cookie on New Year's Eve that says you're about to have a major life change. And then 15 days later, he's diagnosed with cancer. So when that happened, it was kind of like I had assumed we were going to go into this new year and everything was going to be great and shiny and start over. And it has to be, right? Because we're young. What else is going to happen? You think you're invincible. You think, things are going to be great. So when he was diagnosed, the first thing I thought is I believe it was totally God's grace and being there the whole time, but you just want to freak out, but you can't because he's going through his own thing. And I would tell him, he was sick 2 years and 3 months. I would tell him, like, this is your own personal Afghanistan. This is your job. This is your war. This is what you're going through. And I mean, it had to be nothing but God telling me what to say and what not to say, because I knew very quickly I can't let him know how scared I am. One of us is really vulnerable and sick. One of us has to be the strong one. Not that I hid everything from him, but I knew I needed my own person, my own network of people, which would be like my parents or my friends, or, the first 5 weeks he was sick, he was inpatient in the hospital. So I'm balancing working full time and running back and forth to the hospital and, letting the dog out and all that kind of stuff. And I couldn't let him know, oh my gosh, I'm afraid you're going to die. What's going on? All these types of things. So it was just a lot of kind of tucking that away, venting it to other people, but being on autopilot, because you really don't, and we'll get into my story, but when it's your significant other or spouse or whoever it is you're taking care of, you really don't have the luxury but to go into it and be like Sally positive and believe that they're going to be okay. So for a very long time, it was just on autopilot. It's kind of like, when you drive somewhere and then you kind of snap back into focus during your drive and you're like, oh my gosh, where am I? Like, how have I stayed on the course and I've been okay? It was like that for a very, very long time.
This podcast episode is really important because, for one, cancer is so prevalent in this world. Mm-hmm. And just like the previous episode of the podcast I did with, I did it with a wife of a man who had multiple sclerosis. I'm not saying this properly. MS.
Here you are.
Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of butchering it. But her husband was diagnosed with MS, and she told the story of his gradual degeneration, right? Of his ability to move and to be self-sufficient. But a part of the story that we also got to was how hard it was on her as a caregiver, like what she had to do, how she had to, like you said, you got to tuck your feelings away. And she also told about a part where she was leaning on her husband as well. He was still there, able to be there for her. That's why this podcast is so important, because there's so many people who deal with this in so many different aspects. And we'll talk more about, I know that you're a widow now. I'm so sorry. We'll talk more about that as well. But tell me a little bit about chemo. What can you tell me about that and cancer treatment and how it affected him in your life and all that?
Yeah. So what's crazy is it doesn't really. So I actually work at a behavioral health insurance company, getting people connected to counseling and different things. And, people really don't understand insurance or different things until you really have to utilize it. So when he got sick, it was kind of like putting on you have to, as people say these days, like adult, like you have to put on your big girl, your big boy pants, and you have to like do stuff you wouldn't normally do. Like I was talking to his employer and his disability department through work and treatment and diagnosis and all these things. So we'll talk about it, but I wrote this book based on, it's out of Minnesota. A lot of people know it's nationwide, but if you have not heard of it, there's a website called Caring Bridge, where instead of people texting you, emailing you, whatnot, when someone is sick, what you can do is you can do like a blog post, and then people will get that in their email box, if they want to know more about the medical journey. So I did a book in chronological order of, I have a little bit about us, our love story, but then it's those social media posts of getting that support, getting those different things, updating about how he's feeling about chemo, all those things. But in real time, when I'm navigating insurance and disability and treatment and diagnosis and finances and all these things, I actually walk you through how to do it as I'm doing it, because there's so many different things that you don't think of. One of them being, for like a guy to lose their hair when they go through chemo, it's not as big of a deal as, say, you're a woman that's worked like 7 years to grow your hair out and that's your identity, and you lose that and you feel so vulnerable on levels you never thought you would. Just being the spouse, I watched him, his hair fell out in clumps, and just watching him, he did kind of like a funny, like Saturday Night Live thing. Like he would shave sections and do a little dance and try to make it funny. But then when it was finally, his head was fully shaved, it was like, holy crap, he looks like a cancer patient. And just entering that world and those things, it's very, very sobering. My experience of cancer and chemo, is embarrassing as it sounds to say, was like the Julia Roberts movie from the 80s, Dying Young, where like she takes care of the guy with cancer and he's puking all the time and these things. I didn't realize that, with chemotherapy, they have pre-meds they give you so you don't get nauseous, you don't get as sick. What's really, and I talk about it in my book, his mom was like a very toxic person in my life. And what was interesting is she told him one time, when I go to the clinic, I see people, because he was in a clinical trial. He decided to be part of at the University of Minnesota, because he said, if I have to go through it, I want to help other people. I want to gift this to help other people. After he was home, after the inpatient, and he went from like 175 pounds to like 145. He's very tiny. My parents came in, they lived with us on and off, taking shifts. They'd been married 45 years at the time, 55 now. So they were 65 and 72. And they came from Michigan and just said, we're going to take care of them. We're going to help you. You can work. So he had to go like 5 times a week for like 3 months and 2 times a week for, tapering down like that. But someone had to be with him all the time in case he got a fever. He'd have to go in or fall, he was a fall risk, all these things. So he spent a lot of time at the clinic. And what's really interesting is his mom told him, when I see people at the clinic, I see people dying. And he said, when I see people at the clinic, I see people going to get better. So it's interesting, your perspective of how you view cancer through the lens. And we were a team of positivity. Like we said from the very beginning, we can't afford to argue. We can't afford to, not be a solid team in this. And when he was in the hospital the first 5 weeks, I brought like a lamp to make it cozier. And, I have all these suggestions in the book, but I made it like our own little apartment. And I didn't even know the nurses until one of them told me. They'd always be like, the lovebirds are in their apartment. But it's, I would be on my little cot, bed on the floor, and he would be up on his bed like 2 feet above me. And we'd be like holding hands, watching a movie on Friday night, and it's just like, that's what you do. You adapt, you do the best that you do. And you just know it's in God's hands. You have all these people praying for you. And you just know the medicine's got to work. We're young and it's going to happen. And it's, this is a stepping stone, a bigger one that we wanted, but it's a stepping stone. And that's what I truly believed and how I thought about all of it.
Whenever you see people going through chemo, and by the way, before I even say what I'm going to say, I always try to give grace to people because a lot of people don't know how to deal with pain. And this is her son. Like, she's like, I don't, like, I've only ever seen people, I've never seen people get better from this. It's what she's thinking. Like, I only see people struggling from it. Like, how am I going to get my son back? Not knowing that you're also going through your own pain, and we're all in pain. Like, everybody in the world. Like, yesterday I said something to a guy and I was like, man, I got some stuff going on, man. I can't hear, because he was asking me a question and I was trying to text. I was texting him, but he was trying to talk to me. And I was like, I got some stuff going on. I got stuff. And he said, everybody's got something going on. And it's this idea, like in that moment, I was like, yeah, you're right. And so I got faced answering his questions. But when you realize that everybody's got something going on, then you have more empathy towards the way that they view things as well. And this is my thing to her. Like, maybe she didn't realize that you're trying to struggle with all these things as well yourself. So you don't have time for this negativity right now. It's like, yo, I got to do what I got to do.
Yeah. And honestly, it was contentious for a long time. His dad died when he was a teen, and she was narcissistic, not very nice person to start. So it was really tough, but luckily I had a lot of positive people around me too. But yeah, you are correct. People don't know what to do. I talk about it in the book, but I remember going to Target and I'm in like an aisle looking at something, and 2 aisles over, this is because he got sick in 2011. So this is when people first started having the little Bluetooth headphone thingies. And I remember hearing this lady complain about, oh my gosh, I still have this lingering cold and I have to take cough syrup. And I wanted to be like, cough syrup? I don't know if my husband's going to die. Like, shut up about your cough syrup. But to her, that was significant. But when you have the like Megatron in your mind of something, super severe, you are in your own little fishbowl. You are, where that is. And you're so hypersensitive to where you are versus other people. And it's hard not to compare at times.
We're all living in our own different stories, and we all feel like our problems are the worst, So imagine a billion of us in the world trying to do this. We're like, yo, I have my own problem, which is the worst to me. You have your own problem. We're like all trying to. So that's why this podcast exists, is because I want to give perspective. And once you understand people going, you have empathy and you're able to navigate the world a little better. But let's talk about the book. The book has come up a couple of times now. You wrote a book called Wife, Widow, Now What?, which helps navigate topics from insurance to terrors you faced. Like, can you tell me some of these challenges that you faced that caused you to write this book?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is you really want to do as much as you can on your own. And that's just not possible. It's not that you're necessarily I guess some people are too prideful or those different things. Like I said, I had the blessing of my parents helping. But the biggest things, key topics I talk about on other podcasts or cancer groups or whatever, is what's really hard for people is they want to help, but they don't know how to help. So I have a list of like tangible stuff they can do, like cut your grass, shovel the driveway, before we had Instacart and this pandemic grocery delivery and stuff, all that kind of stuff. People really struggle with wanting to help. And when they don't know how, they feel terrible. They can't make the cancer go away. They can't make the illness go away. But, being able to say, hey, can you pick this up? Or, can you get my mail? I had neighbors behind me that helped let my dog out all the time when I was in the hospital. Those things are amazing. So ultimately my story is he got a lot better. In 2012, we went to like the stupid cancer conference in Las Vegas. We were able to, have a vacation. Things kind of seemed normalized. I was going to concerts. I went to a couple silent retreats. I talk about those. You can read about those. I am not Catholic. I went to a Catholic silent retreat because I needed to get away. I went to a Buddhist silent retreat and I am like falling off my yoga mat, falling asleep because I'm so tired. But I'm a very funny person. I have a lot of humor in this book because you have to have humor in hard circumstances. But what happened is, on our 8th wedding anniversary, a couple days before that, we learned he was relapsed. So he went back in the hospital and they basically had to get all the cancer out of his body so he could have a bone marrow transplant, which are really, really risky. Took him months to get all the cancer out. And then he had a bone marrow transplant 5 days after I had surgery for endometriosis. So we're both sitting there on his quote unquote 2nd birthday. And he's getting his transplant of stem cells from baby umbilical cords. And we're both on our painkillers like, but we're like, God's going to get us through this. We don't know how, but it's going to happen. I have these tattoos as good reminders. I got his name when he got sick. I have strength, faith, courage. After he died, I have blessed, different stuff. But, we had these reminders, these positive things of, no matter what, it's going to be okay. Unfortunately, he was in the ICU twice. His transplant took about 60 days. The stem cells worked, but the chemo and radiation he had to prepare his body for that ripped apart his kidneys, his lungs, his bladder. So I got a phone call on Wednesday, April 17th, that he couldn't breathe again. In March, he had a blood clot in his lung. He couldn't breathe. He was on a ventilator. He was supposed to die. There's 1 in a million people survive from that. He did, went out, left the hospital, went to rehab, was learning to walk, learning out all of it. And we're thinking, oh my gosh, it's only going to go up from here. And then he was hospitalized again. And then weeks later, I get this phone call and we say, I love you back and forth a few times. And little did I know that was the last time I'd talked to him. So I had doctors tell me when I got to the hospital at like 7 something in the morning, I'm sorry, which meant, that's it. So they said, okay, we will wait 2 days to make a call. And I thought, well, hell, 2 days, that's my 31st birthday. Yay. And imagine when I looked you up today, you're 31. Like, just imagine having to make these decisions at 31. And then on my birthday, they said, we'll wait 2 more days. And then I just knew, it really wasn't him, wasn't him anymore. He was physically there, but he was gone. That wasn't him. It's just, he'd already left in many ways. So I made a heaven playlist the night before and then played him this heaven playlist after our pastor did the last rites of passage and all of these things, and played that and waited an hour for his heart to stop. I laid in bed with him and I had to sign all the papers, do all that stuff. He donated his body to the University of Minnesota for research, which is just, he did extra bone marrow biopsies, extra spinal taps just for research. So I'm feeling all this calmness and pride in how amazing he was. And I credit all of it to God's grace, but it was kind of like I was just floating above myself, watching it all happen. And I learned, it's like I knew then, but I learned later, hearing other widow stories of, spouses coming back from war and taking their lives or dying during war, or, freak accidents or things like that. I feel so privileged that I was there with him and was able, if he had to die, I was able to see his body actually decompensate and fall apart. And it biologically made sense why he had to die. In the grand scheme of things, it didn't, but we only have one body. It can only do so much. So my book is Rachel 1.0, where it's his illness, and 2.0 is the second I walk out that door. And I'm a widow and I just turned 31 and we'd been married 8.5 years. So I decided about a year after he died, like, oh my gosh, this was so hard. And then, yeah.
Like Rachel 2.0, does that mean you became a new person? What does Rachel 2.0 mean?
I had to reboot my life like a computer. So whether I liked it or not, I had to grow up in so many ways. It's like you feel like you're like, hey there, Sonny, with like your wisdom of what you know compared to other people. I all of a sudden had to plan a memorial service. I had to do all these things that you think, you're not going to do for 40, 50 years. I went to Alaska my friends had a fundraiser. I went to Alaska for 3 weeks. I was always like, tell me what you will. I've seen the Titanic, but I didn't think that I'd be a widow at 31 either. So I went and I surrounded myself, and not everyone in my life understood why I was going, why I needed to do this. And my parents were like, no, she's good. She's got to do this. So being around like glaciers and mountains and things like that, it was just really humbling. It really makes you feel like the size of a pea, compared to the monstrosity of God's nature and world. And that kind of helped me refocus. And then in September, I could barely walk that summer. So in September, I had a hysterectomy. So it's like giving up on another level of dreams of being a mom and those different things. And then I was fortunate to have a little bit of money from a life insurance policy that I took out when he was well. I got a new job, took out a policy on both of us. So I had the grace of not working for 10 months, which was very needed for health and mental health. And just chilled, just slept, one of my sisters came to visit me 2 or 3 months after he died. And she's like, I can't believe you look like another person just because I'd rested. But what was so weird is what people don't talk about is you lose your community of the doctors, the nurses, all the people that ecosystem that's been supportive. It's gone all of a sudden. And I just felt like a hamster that was still on my wheel, but the wheel had been taken away. So it took a while just to chill, realize I didn't have to know, how many white blood cells he had, or what his hemoglobin was, or, all that kind of stuff. The following spring, I thought, this was so hard. I had nothing like this, just for the resources for extra gas cards, or, different things like that. The statistic as of a couple months ago is the average cancer patient uninsured expenses out of pocket per year is like $16.4 thousand. So it's just insane, the amount of catastrophic finances people are faced with. You don't understand insurance. You don't know how to do these things. Luckily, as being a research nerd in social services, I knew how to try to find all these things. And I thought I should put this all in one central place, where when someone is in the fog, or, deer in the headlights of, because the first thing is, oh my gosh, I don't want them to die. Then it's, where are they going to get medical treatment? And then it's, what do I do about my job? I want to be there with them. And then it's also, how are we going to pay for it? How are we going to navigate it? So I decided, why not put it all in like a foolproof plan with my story? And I started putting it all in order in spring of 2014. And then I was just too depressed. I couldn't do it. It was bringing up PTSD. So I just lived life, dated, attempted to date. I worked 3 part-time jobs with two with disabled children, one with a lady with MS. So I'm hustling, having garage sales on the weekend, selling everything on eBay and Amazon and whatnot, just trying to keep my house I thought would be filled with this other person and children, and just struggling, doing the best that I can, but still going out to concerts, having fun with friends. But yet I was home and I was alone. And for about the first year, I would still look at the door sometimes and expect him to walk through it. So like the second year was more painful, because you realize they're really not coming back, even though you know it. So I got a new job at this place in 2015. I actually had my house on the market the summer of 2015. A house a street over from me, listed, same everything, listed 20,000 less. So I couldn't afford that and still be able to move. So I went to IKEA, went to Target, got some stuff spent $500 and got some stuff to make my house new. I'm just doing the best that I could, and then ended up, huge blessing from God, getting a job at this health insurance company. And lo and behold, in the cube next to me is a dude 11 years older than me that has had a hard life, and different things happen as well. And then fast forward a year later and we're married. So I'm married again, and he has a daughter, and I can't have kids, and these different things. So once I was distanced from the grief more, distanced from Rachel, maybe I'm Rachel 2.5, maybe, but distanced from those things, I was able to have the hindsight to say, I dated like a machine, just face-to-face dates. And I really lost respect for myself. I let people treat me like crap. I met this guy when I was 19. The Jacksons that I was telling you about want me to come back and talk about dating, because it is so hard. It is so tricky. Luckily, I married someone who gets that I don't have an ex, who loves and fully embraces the me and the relationship with my late husband that made me who I am, to love him and his child. But I didn't realize I was so searching for someone to just want to know how my day was, to be that other half, to have the inside jokes. And I just kept searching and searching and searching. And I was drinking too much.
Market of dating where people are just wanting to hang out and not really, it's very surface level.
It is. And it's like the time of Tinder, and people are lying to you and saying, oh, I need to focus on my job. And then you're like, you're on Tinder dating somebody else, you sack of crap. Like you're just like, what is going on? Because people really do treat you like crap. And I was so naive. And it took me years later to be able to realize, to give myself the grace and not blame myself for, God had me when I shouldn't have been drinking, shouldn't have been driving after I maybe had a couple too many drinks, or, things like those that I didn't realize I was in a widow fog. I was this version of myself that is not the real me. So once I was more in that place, I was able to formulate it in the book in tangible ways to help people. So what I did is, like, my first Thanksgiving, I did a Misfits Thanksgiving with friends that didn't have anybody else in town or anyone, making these new traditions when there are anniversaries, when there are these holidays and significant things, you have to redo it, adapt it, go through it. So I have suggestions on how to do all that, because those things are really painful. They're really painful. There are big voids. So I just decided, write it all out. And people were like, that have read my book, are like, oh my gosh, you were so good at self-care. And I'm like, kinda, but I'm giving you suggestions on things that I wish I would have done. Like, when your spouse dies, you don't sit around and eat salads. You eat like chocolate cake and pizza and all these things that like lift you up, but then make you feel tired. And, all these tips and tricks and all these different things. So I was able to put it together, and I had a professional editor, but I edited it myself 8 times. And the more I did it, I was able to distance myself farther and farther and farther away. And I would write for, say, 6 or 8 hours and then cry for like 20 minutes, because it was just a labor of PTSD and love. But I'm so proud that I have this, because there was nothing like this out there. There are different groups, there are different things, but it's very, very isolating to be a widow. It doesn't matter what age you are, especially really young, a widow or widower. But if you're someone that doesn't have children, someone that doesn't have someone to look after all the time, you really are like, what do I do? What do I do with my life? And it was one of those things where, when you have like a vacation coming up and you don't really know what every day looks like, but you're like, ooh, I have 6 days. And then you're like, 4 days left, 3 days left. That was my entire life, though. I was just like, God's got something. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. And I would read like my Sarah Young's Jesus Calling and be like, this is so applicable today. But I just kept believing that it has to get better. And it did. It did.
So, okay, I was trying to do my best not to interrupt you because you were on a roll. I didn't want to change the story.
No, you're fine. Go for it.
I could tell that you've told the story quite a bit, but I also want to hear about a couple things. So first off, you dealt with this in such an incredible way for somebody who's 31 years old to have dealt with cancer of their lover, somebody who they were supposed to be with their whole lives, and then to be a widow and to have all these life things happen. For you to have the presence of mind to say, I'm going to write a book to help other people, that is according to this podcast, We're Building the Beast, that's as beastie as you can get as a human. Take me through that. Take me through that decision, because like you were saying, you're going through this thing and you see a lady in the store and she's like, yo, I have a headache and this is the worst thing in the world, or I have a cough, whatever it is. And you're like, dude, I'm losing a partner. I'm losing a life partner. How do you then go from the middle of that pain to say, I want to help people? Even as somebody who did you have to take your husband off life support?
Mm-hmm. I did, yes.
That's a very, very hard decision for a 31-year-old. So please take me through this part, because that's something that I don't know that I really know. I don't think I know anybody who's taken their husband or wife off of life support. So please walk me through this and walk me through what you were going through mentally, emotionally, and that part of life.
Yeah. First off, I'm the youngest of 4, and my mother has always said, Rachel, God puts his hand over your mouth right when it needs to happen. So I feel like those really tense moments, like I had another thing where he wanted stainless pots and pans for Christmas, and his mom bought Teflon ones, and she's like, well, that's what I have. And that's not what he wanted. So he's in the hospital like week 1 or 2, and I'm at like a Macy's returning it, and it's Minnesota, and I'm wearing like all my winter gear. I'm in a mall, I'm sweating, and this woman's like, you have to bring that back tomorrow when we have our sale. And I was like, my husband's in the hospital. And she was like, let me get my manager on the line. And she's like, we can do the return. It's one of those things where you're just like, sometimes you can hold it in, sometimes you can't. So he had this space age radiation to prep his body. Literally, there was this mesh mask. This was before the transplant that they put him in, and they screwed it down. So he's like literally in place. He can't move. It took neurophysicists 40 hours to map his body. He was like number 63 or something in the world to get this. So that'll come into play in a second. But when I was told, I'm sorry, I asked the first time he was in the ICU in March, could this kill him? And they said yes. And his physician's assistant, that was one of his doctors, I just remember looking at her and being like, I hate you with every ounce of my being. And it wasn't her fault. It was just her job. But you want to blame somebody, or not, like you shooting the messenger. So when I was told that in that Wednesday on April 17th, it was kind of like, okay.
What year is this?
2013. So this is April 2013. He had, and I have a section in my book called I have very funny titles for everything. Like, first off, I think you'll think this is entertaining just because this is awful. So he gets diagnosed with cancer when you're young, and I'm sorry for your loss of your friend, by the way. When you're young and you are diagnosed with cancer, they want to harvest your eggs or freeze your sperm. So if you want to have kids someday, you can. So they're like, okay, you have cancer and you need to give 3 cryogenic samples. So we go to this clinic. We're just trying to come to terms. My brother, who lives 7 hours away, drives down. He stays and helps for a week. He's like, Rachel, because we have to go give the sample. And he's like, Rachel, give him a hand. And I'm like, oh my gosh, shut up. And then we go, and there's, hi, I'm Cindy at the desk. And you're just like signing away, storing frozen children. And we go in this room, and it's just like this leather chair, a sink, paper towel, soap, a huge rack of porn. And then they're pumping into the room like, yakety yak, don't talk back, tutti frutti, oh Rudy. So my chapter for that is called like biopsies and tutti frutti or something like that. So I try to be as humorous as I can with all of this because it's heavy stuff, right? So when I'm going through his death and things like that, it's all God's grace. But I've watched him. Oh, what I was saying before is like, he had this heavy. So there's like, it's a form of morphine, but there's, like Vicodin, Percocet, Dilaudid, fentanyl, and then top morphine, fentanyl, and things like that. I believe that's the one that killed like Prince and Michael Jackson and stuff like that. So he's on Dilaudid, which is really high up there. So I've seen him like tanked out of his mind, not knowing who I am, all these things that are sad, and I've got these amazing, awful, but funny stories and whatnot. So I've seen him go through the motions when he was well and living at home. I've seen him like this beastie, mean person on steroids, knowing it's not him. So I've had these phases of watching him decline. I really honestly didn't think that he would die until they told me I'm sorry, because like I said earlier, we're young. He's not going to die, right? We're young. And it wasn't like God's not going to let that happen, but it was, we're just going to go back to the, life at the regular commercial break where they make the happy music and everything's fine again. So over the course of those days, it was just a lot of those 4 or 5 days before he died, just a lot of acceptance, a lot of understanding. This is where he's at. He actually woke up. They had him. I asked because he panicked when I got there, and he had the tube down his throat and everything. A normal person, I want to say, breathes like 13 breaths per minute. He was breathing like 30. So they had this machine help regulate his lungs and whatnot, and he's on life support. And he woke up at one point a day or so before he died, and he looked at me, and I said, "Do you want to keep fighting?" And he said, "No." And I said, oh, you don't? And I'm starting to cry. And I'm like, do you want to see Jesus then? And he's like, no. So he really didn't mean it. And then I said, so you want to keep fighting? And he said, yes. And I said, so he's just shaking his head. And I said, do you trust me? And he said, yes. So knowing I have this world of responsibility was just very, very sobering. He's at the University of Minnesota. Literally across the street from the hospital is the dorm where I lived, where he picked us up for our first date 11 and a half years before that. So I'm in this area, this awful thing going on, but I'm in this beautiful area where I spent my youth, where I'm comfortable. I had a mutual friend of someone that he had lost his wife the December before, and he heard of my story, and he gave her a card for me with 5 $100 bills, which was amazing. So I stayed in a hotel across the street. So it was just this mechanical sit with him, hold his hand, have them do their side smiles. Nothing's changed. My mom, I love Hello Kitty. My mom got me a Hello Kitty birthday cake on my birthday, and I just remember being like, thanks. And then I think I maybe had a bite or two and went and just sacked out, took a nap. I went the next day on Saturday. He died on Sunday, and my dad spent Friday and Saturday at his bedside, just sleeping next to him, knowing he would want someone there. My parents spent so much time in the hospital. My dad would be there at like 7 a.m. before he even woke up. He'd be sitting there waiting to hang out with him. So I felt a lot of comfort and a lot of peace at knowing that he was surrounded by that. But I got a phone call on Saturday night that said, we have like imagine a 2-liter of soda. We have 2 liters of liquid we need to take out of his lungs. And I'm thinking, either like, we need you to okay it. And I'm thinking, okay. So I did. And then we went the next day. My mom and I drove their car there. We called my dad. He came down. Then he took the car home. And then the main bone marrow transplant oncology resident in the ICU came up to me, and he said, he sat down. He's like this nice gray-haired seasoned doctor. So, he's not going to BS you on anything. So he sat down, crossed his leg, crossed his arms, and then touched my knee and said, Rachel, buddy, today's the day. And I just said, okay. And then he was in the hall helping somebody else, and I ran out and I said, are you sure? Are you sure there's nothing else you can do? And he said, yeah. And he had this virus in his bladder that required a lot of mechanical different things they had to do with bags of fluid and whatnot. And he said, even if he got better, he'd always be on oxygen. He would always be, because he'd been on oxygen for the last couple months. He said he'd always have this bladder disease. He'd always have this, and there's nothing we can do. It's time. He's fought harder than most people. So his main doctor from day one, there's a series of doctors coming in and just, hands behind their backs, looking very sobering and saying, I'm sorry. So
this decision lies solely on you, right? It's not a family, just you.
Mm-mm. Just me. So they said, do you want to stop water, hydration? He's on a feeding tube. And I said, yes. So I have to sign the papers for all that. Then someone comes up from the mortuary science school, and I sign the papers that he wants to donate his body. Back to when he first got sick. He had like Comcast cable, and I was like, okay, he's sick. We can't afford cable, which I talk about finances and stuff in the book. So I went to return the cable box, and because it was in his name, I learned I couldn't do anything without being his power of attorney. So to make like the legal financial things, I was his power of attorney. One thing I'm very adamant about is it doesn't matter how healthy, how old you are, you need to get your power of attorney and your healthcare directive in order if God forbid something happens. So at this point, I'm not only I'm his power of attorney, which means I have they would ask you this anyway as the spouse, but I have the legal right to sign away his life, which I did. And I just remember feeling like I was floating above myself, but being at such peace and such peace of knowing, writing this book, it was really, there were things that my siblings that were living in other states and things that there were parts of this journey that were so ugly. I never wanted them to know a part of, and writing it had provided so much closure because I didn't have it alone in my head. But like, he had a bowel movement or peed or something, right? And they put him in one of those Hoyer lifts to clean him up. And this was like the day before he died. And I'm looking at this guy who's 6'2". So he's leaning. I know you're taller than that. Imagine this Hoyer is like, your legs are dangling off one side. Your head's dangling off another. And you just look up and you're like, how did we get from this healthy man that I married to this is not him anymore? And I think those images, as horrifying as they were, they really provided me with being able to see he's really not even here anymore. And
so I guess the process of deciding to write the book also helped your decision a little easier later down the line, because you got to see the gradual, what would you call it, progression, or
his decline, progression. Yeah, it did. And what was really fascinating is, well, what I was going to say about the mask where he was pinned down, he was like, he wanted to take it home, like as a war trophy or whatever you want to say. Man, when I found out he was going to die, I took that baby out of the closet and just stomped on it. It was like, kind of like, screw you, mask. I called our pastor. It was a Sunday, so of course he was preaching. So we kind of had to wait. And then I had everyone come in. We did the rites of passage. It was his mom, aunt, sister, stepdad, my mom and dad, and the pastor. So he did the rites of passage, prayed over him. Then I had everyone take a turn, listen to his heartbeat. At this point, he's like puffy and purpley kind of, and really not him. So they unplug him, and I lay there. I'm covered up in a blanket with him, and I lay there, and his physician's assistant doctor's like, let me have your phone. Let me take your picture. And I was like, why? And she said, she said, you're going to want these pictures. And I was thinking, what are you talking about? And she's like, you're going to want these pictures, which I did, because I looked at those pictures later to fully see he's gone. There's nothing you could have done. There's literally nothing. So it took about an hour, and I played the Heaven playlist, but he had these like animalistic noises of, needing air, needing life. So it was a matter of just waiting for his heart to stop and his lungs to give out. And it took about an hour. And then I rang the little like side bell thing, and then had her come in and confirm that he was dead. And then I picked up his head, and no pun intended, it was dead weight. And I looked at him, and it was just fascinating because it was almost like Spider-Man. Just his veins, it was like everything, his veins, you could see them all. They just turned purple right away. And I was like, I'm getting out of here. So I covered him up, and then I played Love Will Tear Us Apart by Joy Division, his favorite song in the whole world, did a little dance for like 15 seconds, uncovered him and said, you wanted to beat cancer and you did. And then I covered him back up and I left, and then Rachel 2.0. And it was just really weird, like waiting for the car, because my mom and I were waiting for my dad to pick us up, and it's like April 21st and there's snow out. There'd been a blizzard, all these things, and snow is one of my favorite things in the world. So I think God did that just for me. But it was so weird I had this like pull of, you got to run back upstairs to him, but he's not there anymore. So it's just really weird because I'm already in this weird limbo of who am I? Wife, widow, now what?
It's, wow, I can't imagine. I cannot imagine at all what it is that you had to deal with. Your mom was there as a support system. What else did you have as a support system during this time? I know you said something about doctors, but like I said, I'm trying to paint the picture for people out there who don't know what people who are caretakers for cancer patients, they don't know what they're going through, right? So who did you have as a support system, and who did you need as a support system? You said something about a pastor as well.
Yeah, I went to a therapist for the year after I got sick. So I went for a couple years, and she was someone who specifically had worked with people that had gone through illnesses. And it was amazing. It was so freeing to go see her and just feel like you just get it out, you get some skills. That's why I love my profession of helping get people connected to counseling. I think it's really underrated. Unfortunately, we're in a society still of people that think that there's so much stigma attached to it, but I think everybody needs a therapist. It should be subsidized. Everybody should have, let's get a stimulus therapist.
See, I had this conversation with an older man, and he said, why would I go see a therapist who has just as much problems as I do, but they get to tell me how to live my life? And I said, no, that's a crazy argument. That's not the argument is not, because you could easily say doctors get sick. Why would I go see a doctor? Right?
Right?
Yeah. It's to show you a different perspective. That's it. A lot of times the therapist is just telling you what you're saying, right? Like you will say something, you don't even know that that's what you're saying about yourself, about your situation,
Yeah.
about whatever situation that you're in. But you don't hear yourself when you speak about it. You don't hear yourself when you talk about yourself. It's a mirror for you to understand how you're moving through life, and how, whether it's different from your goals or wherever it is you're trying to go, like what is it that you want to accomplish in this life? Is it communication? Is it just having an affirmation, like just the way you think about yourself and your situation? So big advocate over here, if you can't tell, for therapy.
I love it.
It's saved my life. Michael Jordan and even Kobe, like these guys, they talked about George Mumford, who was a therapist, and talked about how he saved their lives. So it's a very important thing. And to anybody out there, just know, like, that's a tool that you can use while you're building your beast. Okay. So you had to move on, and you said something a little bit about dating, having to date again. Tell me more. How difficult was that?
What was weird is it was like, do I tell them ahead of time that I'm a widow? Do I not? People can't seem to understand, it's so intimidating that you don't have an ex, because you have someone, you're coming from something that you love. So what's really tricky is you're not just going to drop it. It's not the ex that you're just going to say, screw them and move on. You're going to talk about that person because it's brought to you to who you are. So I found that dynamic really hard.
For other widows out there who are going into the world, who have lost their sense of identity, and they're, they've lost their partner. What did you learn? And you said something about, this is a crazy world out there now in terms of dating. I have a friend who is now in his 40s. He was with his wife since they were 21, and now he's 20 years later having to date again. What tips do you have for people who are widows after being together for a while?
Yeah, what's crazy now is COVID's taken so many people too, because people years from now are going to be doing that. I think the biggest thing is you need to give yourself space and time. One of my sisters was like, stop dating. Why do you keep dating? Just spend some time by yourself. And I was like, by myself, like all the time. I remember I had one job where I just felt so alone one day. I asked the mom of the little girl that I worked for to give me a hug. And she was like, why? And I was like so embarrassed, but you need this human contact. You need that. I had looked at it a lot, but I wish that I would have accessed it more. There's a app and website, meetup.com, where you can get together. Say you like doing puzzles, or you like beer tastings, or walking, or yoga, or whatever. I think it's really important to like figure out what your interests are, the new you, and things like that, and then naturally just let it happen. I had a gazillion online dates, and then it turns out the guy that I marry next, I just randomly meet in the cube next to me. I think that there's so much pressure on, we have all the social media at our fingertips to try to meet people with, but really we're just postering the best parts of ourselves. You know, people presented themselves as way different than they were, or, you know, different things like that. I think that just trying to figure out the new groove of who you are and what's important. And I certainly, you know, within as disastrous as some of the dating was, it was also fascinating and fun because I found out who I really was. Because within talking about yourself, you find out more about yourself. So I think, you know, giving yourself space, time, figuring out what's important, certainly trying people out, but knowing that you probably will fall on your face. It might be a little bit of a nightmare, but if it's not, you know, for me, God was like, nope, 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 keep going, nope. And it ended up working out.
That's very important for people to hear. Like, you gotta, like, it's gotta be organic. And part of being organic is you gotta show all of yourself, not just the best parts of yourself.
Yeah.
My last question is always the same for everybody, is what would you tell your younger self?
Yeah. One thing I really like to say to tell people is, like, you see those pictures of people in like the Klondike, Alaskan, Yukon time, right? You see the people like person behind person behind person going up those snowy mountains. Those people put it all on the line, not knowing whether they would come home, they'd find gold, they would live, whatever. It doesn't make it, what you're going through right now, any easier, more fair, or any better. But more than likely, what you're going through that's really tough is going to provide you with nuggets of gold, probably not for years later, but that can help you write a book or have a new career or volunteer, or being able to say, you know, Festus, I'm so sorry. I've been there. I get it. You know, where I am in my life right now, it's not like I got married and everything's rosy. I have a toxic person in my life that's fortunately stuck there for quite a while. This is very hard. I got a new job, met an incredible guy, also got a digestive disease, got super, super sick. You know, life is going to hand you these things, but you're going to get nuggets. You're more than likely going to get nuggets of gold that help you frame where you're at and to connect with someone else. I know for me, when I get really digestively sick and really don't feel well, I think to myself, you know what? You are not in a hospital. You are not hooked up to stuff. You can make it. God has brought you this far. And my biggest thing is, footprints is my favorite go-to. And it's like, God has been there carrying me, has not dropped me. And I think it's really important for people to know that you will more than likely get positives out of this. And I went from A to Z back to A again, to the point where if I didn't have his name tattooed on my arm, if I didn't write this book, if I didn't have pictures or people in my life that knew him, might not believe that it even happened. But when you have that grief or that illness roller coaster that you're on, life is going to buckle that bar down, and the dude's going to go to the seat behind you to make sure they're secured, and you're stuck. You're on it. Ride it. Be submissive. Go through it. Be authentic. Let people in. Let people know what you're going through, and you really will be okay. And I hated cliches. I hated when people would say, oh, you know, in time things heal. You're like, shut up. But, you know, when people don't ever say to someone, oh, I know how you feel, because you don't. But if you say, you know, how can I help? Or I imagine it would be hard. Tell me, you know, those little things. One thing I do on my phone is I set a timer, an alarm to check in with a couple of friends. Do that. Check in with people. You will blow up their world just letting them know that you care. And you really can get through tough stuff. If I did it, I believe other people will. And I'm just really excited to share my book that shows I did it. This is how I did. These are tons of tips of how you can do it too. And you know what? With God on your side and with positivity, you can choose to be bitter or better. And it's so good to choose to be better.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Hey, Festus here. I hope you liked that episode. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and here's some more episodes that you might like. On this side.